wanted to answer two questions in this study. First of all, was it true? Were there really people living in isolation without the help of dentists or doctors and all the marvels of modern technology who had perfect dental health, no cavities, no dental deformities, and by inference, good overall health? And if he could answer this first question with a yes, the second question was, what were these people eating? What kind of diet did these healthy people have? He wasn't interested in the diets of unhealthy people. He knew what unhealthy people were eating. He wanted to know what the diets of healthy people looked like. And that was the genius of Dr. Price. He asked the right questions, and then he very persistently and carefully sought the answer to these questions. Now, the first place that Dr. Price went was Switzerland. He was only able to study 2 European cultures because isolated Europeans were fast disappearing. Switzerland had embarked on a huge campaign of road building to connect all the villages and towns in Switzerland. But there were still a few villages that had no roads connecting them. They were at the very far end of the Laurentian Valley, which was surrounded by very steep mountain ranges. And the only access to these little villages at this end of the valley was a footpath too narrow for a wheeled cart. So he could be assured that all of the foods that they ate in this village were foods grown and processed in the village, with one exception, and that was salt. They had no salt there, and they had to carry salt in. When he came to a village or a tribe, he always found an interpreter, and he sat down with the elders. He asked their permission. And when he got their permission, he then lined up every individual in the village, young and old, no exceptions, and looked in every mouth and meticulously counted cavities. He left us a fantastic record of dental decay or lack thereof among traditional peoples. He took notes about the shape of the jaw, whether or not they had dental deformities. And that part of his research was extremely precise and scientific. He then took more general notes about the overall health of these people. He described the foods that they ate, and then he took samples of the foods back to his laboratory in Cleveland and analyzed them for nutrient, vitamins, and minerals. So that's how Dr. Price worked. So you can, let's see, got a new clicker here. So here he is in the village, and the first thing he does is look at the children. He lines all the children up and looks in their mouths, and you can imagine the amazement of the dentist from Cleveland opening all these mouths, and he had to look in 3 mouths before he found even one tooth that was decayed. You can bring me a glass, okay, thank you. So there was less than 1% tooth decay among the children and the adults in this isolated Swiss village. And they had no toothbrushes here, no toothpaste, no fluoridated water, no dentists, no fluoride treatments, but they had virtually no tooth decay. Yeah, you can just pour me a little glass of that. This is the Grainfields drink. It really gives you lots of energy. We'll talk about this later. And the other amazing thing was that all these children had naturally straight teeth. There was nobody in this village that needed braces. They had broad faces, strikingly broad faces, broad noses, broad nostrils, lots of air could be breathed in the high mountains. Thank you very much. This wonderful photograph, which was released just a few years ago by the Price-Pottinger Nutrition Foundation, it's a little bit hard to see, but the children's faces are very round, and they have a lot of space, especially in the middle third of the face, what you would call high cheekbones, which is, of course, a sign of attractiveness. The children were very sturdy and strong. They played barefoot in the freezing cold water of the streams coming off the mountains during weather in which Dr. Price and his wife had to button up their heavy overcoats. In talking to the health officials of Switzerland, they told him that they had never known of a single case of tuberculosis in this village, and this was a time when tuberculosis was the #1 health problem throughout Switzerland and indeed throughout the world. The men in the village were noted for their great strength. They routinely won the athletic contests held throughout Switzerland, and the women from this village were noted for their beauty. So here we have a population where he could answer that first question with a yes. They had excellent dental health, and by all that he could determine, excellent overall health. So the next question is, what were they eating? The number one source of calories in this diet was the same food that was accused of causing tuberculosis throughout the world, raw milk. They kept cattle and goats who grazed on the lush green pastures beneath the melting glaciers, and they consumed the raw milk. They made raw cheese, had raw butter, and raw cream. Cream was considered very important for the athletes during their athletic contests. They didn't do carb loading. They drank bowls of pure cream, so very high-fat diet. The other main source of calories in the diet was grain. They grew rye in the short summer months, and they made a very dense sourdough rye bread. Typical lunch for the children going to school would be a thick slice of this heavy bread and an equally thick slice of the raw cheese on the bread. And this is, again, very interesting because one of the theories that we have out there about why we have so many health problems today is that we're eating these two foods that are new to human beings, to the human species, dairy foods and grains. And yet here was a superbly healthy population living on dairy foods and grains. But the dairy foods were very different from the dairy foods we buy in the supermarket today, and the grains were processed and handled with much more care than the grain products that we buy today. These people did eat meat. Any population that eats dairy foods eats meat, at least occasionally, because they have animals that get old and they slaughter the young male animals. And so they mostly ate veal. And as with any traditional culture that eats meat, nothing goes to waste. They ate the organ meats. They used the bones to make soup. They ate the fats. No one was there to tell them that the fats were bad. And they had and they tasted good. The fats tasted good, so of course they ate them. They did grow some vegetables in the short summer months, but they didn't have a lot of vegetables and certainly no fruit in the diet. It was mainly animal foods and grains. Now, every culture that he went to had one or more sacred foods. The sacred foods were foods considered very important for men and women before conception, for women when they were pregnant, breastfeeding, and for children when they were growing. Every population that he went to recognized the need for extra nutrition to form and grow a new human being. And this is the wisdom of these people really puts us to shame. We tend to leave all these things to chance in modern culture. The sacred food among the Swiss villagers was a special type of butter. It was the butter that came from the cows when they first went to pasture in the spring. This butter was a deep orange color. And they actually had a ceremony where they put a bowl of butter on the altar in their church and lit a wick in the butter to honor the life-giving force in the butter. So I look forward to the day when we do this in all of our churches. Here's a picture of the bread. Normal loaves were quite a bit smaller. This is a festival loaf for Easter. And that loaf of bread will weigh 20, 25 pounds. Very dense. They put a hole in the bread, and so they can hang it on a hook. The actual process of making the bread takes a few days. It's a very slow sourdough process. And then they hang it for at least 2 weeks to allow it to cure or to age, just like a ham or a bottle of wine. We recently learned that actually in these villages they only made bread twice a year. And so this bread lasted for 6 months hanging up like that. Have a look at the beautiful facial structure of the woman. What Dr. Price referred to as the middle third of the face is very broad. She has very high cheekbones. This is the facial construction that we associate with beauty. The old actresses in the old black and white movies had this type of facial structure. It's disappeared today. We don't see that anymore. She's nice and slender in spite of their high-fat diet, and what I like best about this photograph is the hat. Isn't it beautiful? Now, everywhere that Dr. Price went, he could observe a world in transition. from the primitive peoples on their traditional foods to modernized people eating Western processed foods. And when he went to the villages in Switzerland where there was a road, there was invariably food stores. There weren't food stores in the primitive villages. Nobody bought food. They raised their own food. So there were food stores, and these stores contained what he called the displacing foods of modern commerce. So these were not only empty foods, but they were pushing out the nutrient-dense foods that they had eaten before. So this is jams and jellies and pastries, chocolates, white bread, canned foods, canned condensed milk, and another new factor in the Western diet, vegetable oils, something completely new to the human diet. Here, when he examined people's mouths, he found 1 tooth in 3 was decayed. So you've gone from less than 1% to 33% tooth decay. So lots of missing teeth. But even more concern to him, the children who were born after the parents changed their diet, basically after the road came to the village, did not have as broad a face, and there was not enough room in the jaw for the teeth to come in straight, so they had dental deformities. And he noted that the children with dental deformities were much more susceptible to diseases like tuberculosis. The other European group that he was able to study were some Gaelic people living off the coast of Scotland in the Outer Hebrides. This particular island that he visited had no commerce with the outside world. Here he found a very hardy, healthy population, virtually no tooth decay, no tuberculosis, and what struck him most was the good humor and spirituality of these people. No one had to lock a door. Everyone seemed to get along, and a very gregarious, talkative population. Now, these people lived on this foggy, windswept island. They could not keep animals there, so there was no meat in the diet, no eggs, no dairy foods. There were no vegetables in the diet, no fruit. They couldn't grow fruit. No broccoli. How could they possibly be healthy without broccoli? So what in the world were these people eating? Well, the number one source of calories in this diet was seafood. And not just the skinless fillets of the fish. They ate the heads, they ate the livers, they separated the oil of the livers and ate that. They had shellfish. They did have one green food, which was seaweed. And they also raised oats on the island, which they made into porridge and oat cakes. So this was a diet based on seafood and oats. And the sacred food, the food that children got every morning for breakfast to make sure they grew up healthy and strong, was, no, not quite, it was cod's head stuffed with oats and chopped cod's liver. Eat your breakfast, dear. These people lived in stone cottages covered with thatch, and they did not have chimneys in their cottages. So these people were living in smoky cottages all winter long. They had no lung disease, living in this secondhand smoke. And we will come back to this theme. It's a very interesting question. Why didn't they get lung cancer? Why didn't they have TB when they were basically smoking all day long, breathing in smoke? But it was very important not to have chimneys because during the winter the thatch became blackened with the smoke, and that was their fertilizer. And in the spring they took the thatch off and spread it on the fields, and that was their fertilizer. Dr. Price took some of the island soil home with him and planted oats in the soil. This is oats planted in the island soil with no fertilizer added. These 4 pots had various types of commercial fertilizer added, and this pot had the blackened thatch added, and it was the only pot that got a mature crop of oats. Now, as these people became modernized on other islands where the foods had started to come in, tuberculosis became a big problem, and the health workers said, well, you need to put chimneys in your cottages so you're not breathing in smoke all the time, and they made the people put in chimneys, which did not solve the problem and did not answer the question why it was that these very primitive Gaelic people had no lung disease even though they were living in smoke all day long.